Welcome to the Confidence Through Health podcast. My name is Jerry Snyder. As a health, wellness, and sports performance coach, my goal each week is to bring you experts to help you take control of your health and build your self-confidence. Thanks for including me today on your journey to better health. I want to say thank you to Social Media Cowboys for sponsoring this week's episode of the Confidence Through Health podcast. If you need help with a website, if you need social media needs for your business, if you need help with AdWords, SEO, all those things that you know you should be doing, but you are too busy to do or you're too confused about, they are the experts that you need in your corner. If you're interested in launching a podcast, such as mine, they help me edit my podcast and do a fantastic job making sure that all of the technical side of it is handled and we launch a nice, neat, edited podcast episode each week. So I want to thank Social Media Cowboys for their continued sponsorship of the Confidence Through Health podcast. You can find them at socialmediacowboys.com, or you can find them as well with other sponsors at confidencethroughhealth.com. Well, Corey, I want to thank you for being a guest on the Confidence Through Health podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. This is such a great opportunity. I really appreciate it.
And I'm really excited, like I was saying before we started recording, to talk to you because this topic is gaining momentum, along with some other topics in the health world, and especially in the U.S., as we start looking at what's in our food. That's become a really hot topic in the past couple of months. But seed oils itself has really started to generate some momentum. I started looking at them 4, 5, 6 years ago, somewhere in that range, and like looking at my nutrition and things and trying to figure it out. But by no means am I an expert, but that's why I wanted to have you on, to help us sort of figure out some of the ins and outs of what are we looking for? What are seed oils, all that kind of stuff. But before we get into all that, like what drove you into working with the Seed Oil Free Alliance?
Yeah, thank you so much for setting that up. So, we founded the company in 2023. My business partner and I, Jonathan Rubin. It's a certification company, so probably a lot of your listeners will be familiar with things like the Non-GMO Project, appearing on packages, USDA Organic, the gluten-free certification organization, kosher. There are actually hundreds of these. What we realized was that there wasn't one for seed oils, and that seed oils are really hard to avoid if you're looking to do that. We kind of connected the dots and said, both of us want to avoid seed oils. We think that this is kind of a growing movement. This was back in late 2023, so it wasn't quite as much of a hot topic as it is today.
Yeah.
And so we dove in and built this certification. Part of my background, I had done science writing and consumer education in the health and wellness space. So I was pretty familiar with the seed oil kind of issue. I had read a lot of studies about it. And I noticed also at the time that we were building this certification that, a lot of the information coming from both sides was incomplete or misleading. So on the anti-seed oil side, people will say essentially like, if you eat one serving of seed oils, it stays in your body for 7 years and you're screwed. And that's a very extreme argument to be. Yeah, that's not, that's kind of on the one side. And then on the other side, I noticed that a lot of people that should know better, that are kind of public health experts, are saying things like there is no cause for concern around seed oils. Seed oils are good for you. Don't worry about it. That's misinformation. So, we also saw this opportunity to show up and help people think for themselves. So we're not going, as a company, we're not going to tell people, do this, you got to think this. We're here to provide information that's evidence-based. And our seal that appears on products is there for people who do want to avoid seed oils, and for these companies that are actually spending more on ingredients. Because when you get rid of soybean oil or canola oil and you go with avocado oil or olive oil, it costs more.
Right.
And so it's very important that those companies making that decision can reach the right consumers.
Right.
So that's how we got to where we are now. And, we actually launched the company in June of last year. We've now certified over 100 UPCs, like the individual
Nice.
products,
Yeah.
across 40 plus companies to date. Not all of them have printed the seal on their packaging, but usually it's green, sometimes it's black and white, droplet shaped.
Mm-hmm.
And it says seed oil free certified. So, anyone that is just looking for high quality products or products that don't have seed oils, we have a lot of great brand partners right now. And, really what I'm here to do is kind of help people decide if this is an issue that they care about, because I think it's
Right.
it's actually, I think people are hungry for information on this, and it's hard to find, um, you know, information that you can trust, or
Yeah.
or really the information that you need to make a decision, because what I see is that both sides are just sort of saying, like, here's what you must believe, and
Right.
and that doesn't work for me, and I think that doesn't work for a lot of people.
Well, and I think that's that. Yeah, that's the nail on the head. That's like one of the things that I do when I talk to people and they're like, "Okay, what should I do?" I'm like, "Okay, well, this is what I've learned about this from this study and that study, and if you want to go look it up, here's where you go look it up. Don't just necessarily take my advice because it's my advice." And I think that's something that more and more people are starting to do. Um, and then when you start to with a topic like seed oil, you start to look into it, and it's like, oh my gosh, like this could be causing so many different health issues um, throughout our country. And so to like for somebody that's just hearing this and going like, "Oh, okay, I hear about seed oils, I don't really know what's going on, I don't really know, like you said, is it bad, is it good, I hear this different stuff." So what is a seed oil and why sort of did it become into practice?
Sure. So the term is really new for consumers. I think no one really called any, no consumer really called any cooking oil or fat ingredient a seed oil until
Hmm.
maybe 5 years ago.
Hmm.
It's actually not a new term in the industry. In the production and kind of commodification of cooking oils,
Hmm.
this term is over 100 years old. It's a useful term. It refers to a liquid. This is our definition that we use for our standards, but it
Yeah.
refers to a liquid edible oil extracted from a seed,
Hmm.
or we could get a little more technical and say composed of fatty acids extracted from a seed.
Right.
As you know, there are many different types of seeds. Um, anything you can grow a plant from, like seed, nut, they all
Yeah.
count as seeds.
Right.
Now, when we're talking about this, despite the fact that there are dozens of different seed oils, the ones that people are actually eating, the most common ones, there are really only about three
Yeah.
that everybody's eating all the time if they're not trying to avoid them. Those three are soybean oil, corn oil, and canola oil.
Hmm.
Um, there are other seed oils that are fairly common, but they're just a tiny blip compared to soybean, corn, and
Right.
canola. The other ones would be sunflower, peanut oil,
Hmm.
grapeseed, safflower. Um, let's see, there are cottonseed.
Sesame in there.
Yeah, so sesame, I would sesame is actually extremely uncommon. I mean, we think about it a
Hmm.
lot if you're eating kind of like some, traditional Asian foods and things
Right.
like that. In terms of like how much the average American eats in a year, it's probably like,
It's very
you know,
little.
half an ounce or something in a
Yeah.
year. Yeah.
Okay.
And sesame oil is actually an interesting example because that's a traditional seed oil. So most of the ones that I just listed, no one really ate before about 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Um, sesame, like virgin or crude sesame oil goes back 1,000 plus years.
Yeah.
It's actually got some benefits. It's got some things in common with modern seed oils, but it's also got benefits from the fact that it's less processed.
Right.
So, you look at a sesame seed, it's got these lignans and phenols and these other kind of beneficial antioxidant compounds. It
Hmm.
tastes great if you know how
Right.
to use it in a recipe. Um, so that's sesame oil would be what we call a low concern seed oil.
Hmm.
So the
Okay.
point that I'm getting at is not all seed oils are similar in all ways.
Yeah.
And the biggest issues with seed oils today are the amount that people are consuming. I was telling you before you hit record that the average American gets 20 to 30% of their daily calories from seed oils.
Which is just crazy.
Yeah, yeah, and that
Like,
comes, by the way, that comes from the USDA Economic Research Survey
yeah.
and the FAO, that's the UN Food and Agriculture Organization,
Hmm.
vegetable oil
Hmm.
projections. So 20% at the low end estimate,
Yeah.
30% at the high end. That's actually adjusted downward because when we throw away cooking oil, we're not eating it. So the
Right.
numbers would be higher if you just look at the amount that people are buying and using. But in
Right.
terms of actually consuming, 20 to 30%. Oils like sesame oil really don't account. Like if
Mhm.
you like you could eliminate sesame oil from the US and that number would still be 20 to 30% from other
Right.
seed oils.
Right.
Um, so, when you just thinking about flipping a packaged food around and reading the ingredient label, if you look for something that says oil and it looks like it was made from a seed, so like olive oil's not a seed oil,
Mhm.
avocado oil's not a seed oil, coconut oil seems like it would be, but it's not.
Yeah.
Those are all kind of what you would call fruit oils because
Mhm.
they're made from the fleshy outer part, not the seed itself.
Yeah.
The again, soybean, corn, and canola are really inexpensive. They're really commonly used. They're kind of just the default ingredient for a company that is looking for the least expensive option.
Yeah.
They're not used because they're amazing in terms of flavor.
Mhm.
Actually, they're typically used in foods where you have to add a lot of other flavoring
Yeah.
ingredients to give them
Right.
an interesting flavor and
Yeah.
mouthfeel. If you compare that to something like butter or tallow or olive oil, these, traditional oils and fats
Mhm.
actually have a lot of great culinary properties.
Yeah.
So, you can make a potato chip with just potatoes, tallow, and salt, and it's going to taste great. But
Right.
if you make a potato chip with, soybean, potato, and salt, you're going to have to add some other things in there,
Mhm.
some dextrose, maybe some MSG to give it that
Right.
um, similar taste.
Yeah. Well, and not to mention that those crops, right? Corn, soybean, like those crops are notorious for not being the healthiest farmed crops when it comes to pesticides and things that they're using on them. And so it's, you're getting so many other pieces to the puzzle of what your body's trying to fight to be healthy. And, and you're not getting that when it's avocado or olive oil or um, coconut, like you're not getting the same type of pesticide residue in those crops as well. And so, it's sort of compounding issues along the way.
Yeah, it definitely overlaps with other things that a lot of health conscious consumers care about. Kind of like you were saying, GMOs, pesticides,
Mm-hmm.
even land use, like this
Mm-hmm.
monocropping
Yep.
and intensive agriculture is not great for the environment. Um, I think you had asked sort of sort of an overview of seed oils. I would say, um, why they're getting a lot of attention now is because it's shocking to realize that for the past 100 years, consumption of these oils has been growing each
Yeah.
decade, and that even most health conscious people 10 years ago weren't really thinking about this.
Right.
People in the past did think about omega-6 fats.
Mm-hmm.
So there is pretty much a one-to-one when we're talking about omega-6 fats. We're talking about seed oils.
Yeah.
Um, However, just using this plain language of seed oils makes it so easy to identify them. Like
Yeah.
if I go and tell someone that's kind of new to thinking about healthy eating, hey, avoid omega-6 fats. Well, then I have to explain what omega-6 fats are and where they
Mm-hmm.
appear. But if you just say seed oils, hey, like look for this, go to your pantry right now and look at the ingredients that have seed oils in them, ingredients list. You can immediately, it's like a light bulb moment. You start
Yeah.
thinking about this and wow, they're in everything.
Right. Well, and so that's one of my questions is like, what would be something that people would be like, oh, there can't it like this is a processed food, right? That there's not going to be any oil in this. Like it's what would be something that like I think everybody understands that like okay, if I go get French fries at the store, they're cooked in oil. Potato chips, like they're going to be cooked in oil. Like I think there's certain things that we know, like okay, that's just it. But is there something that's out there that's like people would be like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, they're used, again because of the low cost, they're used so commonly in
Mhm.
all different kinds of, often in small amounts, but they actually are kind of hidden away frequently in places like natural flavors.
Mm.
They're used as what's called processing aids. So this has been making the rounds on social media recently, but like there's I think it's a Purdue um, breaded chicken nugget out there,
Mhm.
and it doesn't say soybean oil on the ingredient list, but it's fried for like less than 10 seconds to set the breading.
Mhm.
And people have emailed that company and said, "Hey, does this have soybean oil in it or not?" And Purdue has kind of given them this legalese answer saying, "Well, the FDA considers this an incidental additive or a processing aid, so
Mhm.
it's not listed on the ingredient list.
Yeah.
It does contain a certain amount of fat." from soybean oil, but we don't consider it an ingredient. That makes people angry because they're
Oh
like,
yeah.
hey, I deserve a right
Hmm.
to make a decision, but I thought the ingredients list was factual. Well, it
Yeah.
turns out it's not always. It is used as seed oils are used as, it's called a sub ingredient.
Hmm.
So, like for example, if you make a product and it has dried cranberries in it, and then there's a small amount of seed oil coating the cranberries to keep them
Hmm.
from sticking, you may not be required to list that on the package.
Right.
So, this is something that we think about a lot as we're certifying foods, because sometimes companies don't even know all of the
Hmm.
places that seed oils can make their way in. Now, I
Yeah.
will say, that's important for some company that's saying this is seed oil free, because,
Hmm.
it either is or it isn't.
Yeah.
And we're here to make sure that it actually is seed oil free. It's not always a large amount.
Hmm.
So if you're the kind of person that just wants to say, hey, I'm going to avoid them as much as possible, that's important. But I would say, in terms of areas that people might not be thinking about it, that just have large amounts of seed oils, I would say sauces and condiments.
Hmm.
You look at a mayonnaise or a salad dressing, a serving is going to be 1 or 2 tablespoons.
Right.
It's like 50% oil, so you're getting 14 grams of
Yeah.
soybean oil in a
Right.
in a serving of dressing.
Yeah. Um, well, and to your point too on the like, are you just trying to minimize your exposure completely, or are you trying to be completely free of it? What initially popped in my head was I've talked to people about gluten free and the movement there, and trying to help people understand the processing, and like some things they may look like from the appearance that they're gluten free, but they've been exposed to gluten at some point during the process, and so whether it's in a restaurant or manufactured. And so that stamp of approval of being gluten free is hugely important to some people because of the allergy factor of it,
Right.
right? And like so seed oils, there's not really an allergy component to it, right? But
Correct.
it can be, the that type of fat, if you're getting 30% of your calories from omega-6 fats, that could be very dangerous.
Yeah. No, you hit on a couple of great points there that I think we should kind of unpack for listeners. So one of them is, um, like you said, so officially they're not allergens.
Right.
Allergies relate to proteins that are used, or rather found in foods.
Hmm.
These seed oils are very highly processed. They're filtered, they're heated. The proteins would denature and then be pulled out through filtration and
Hmm.
purification. Um, so it's unlikely that someone would have like an anaphylactic reaction. Now, on the other hand, hey, if I had a really serious peanut allergy, I'm not going to eat peanut
Oh,
oil,
right.
because
Yeah.
all it takes
Yeah.
is one
Of
mistake.
course. Yep.
The guy at the filtration plant is hungover or something like that, and then you're right back to being exposed. So
Yeah.
I think that's a serious concern in terms of like hidden seed oils for
Yeah.
people that are, just wanting to really minimize their risk, that do have an actual allergy. Now, some people do have, or say they have, and I believe them, like sensitivity
Hmm.
issues that probably don't relate to like the allergy, protein,
Hmm.
histamine pathway. But I think that people do have, like, probably the 2 or 3 biggest areas where I would say there's some evidence for sensitivity would be like gut issues.
Hmm.
Some people will eat a certain seed oil. Seems often it's canola oil, and they just have, gut symptoms. Some
Right.
of these people may also have like IBS
Hmm.
or Crohn's, and there is
Right.
some evidence there that, just eating a diet high in seed oils and omega-6 fats may increase the risk of those types of gut issues. So I completely believe people when they say, "Hey, if I even eat a serving of seed oils, I feel terrible."
Yeah.
I believe that. It is important that we think about it as a sensitivity rather than an allergy.
Hmm.
The other the other area actually that people seem to have this type of issue with a buildup of omega-6 fats is pain disorders.
Mm.
So, migraines and other types of headaches, as well as
Yeah.
things like arthritis, because a lot of the pain signaling, prostaglandins and things like that are made from omega-6 fats.
Right.
So, it kind of stands to reason that if you've got some underlying health issue and you're loading up that omega-6 pathway, You know, again, there is some evidence to support this, but I would say this is something that people can explore for themselves. So if you've
Yeah.
got, a gut issue or some kind of pain or headache issue, and you want to try eliminating seed oils for 2 or 3 months,
Hmm.
it may help. And if you're really experimental, you could always try adding it back in and see if it goes back,
Right. Yeah.
um, back to how it was.
Right. Um, well, and so for somebody who is trying to, you know, reduce or slash eliminate seed oils, um, outside of going to which is something that I did a couple years ago. I went completely raw and was eating just raw fruits and vegetables and nuts. And so it was like I wasn't cooking anything. There's no oils anywhere, no manufactured foods. Like you can do that, but like it's pretty extreme, I'll admit. Like for somebody else who's looking at it, like what are and as I know from my daughter has a corn allergy, and so when we identified that when she was oh gosh 3 or 4 years old, it was like oh my gosh, okay, now we've got to learn all the different words for corn that are put on the food labeling, and that it becomes a nightmare almost trying to figure out how many different because there's like over 15 different ways they can label corn
Yeah, I can
on an
imagine. Yeah.
on a and so it's like oh my gosh, so is it just that we need to look for specifically corn, canola, soybean, like the high big ones? And are they on the ingredient list, or are there other ways that they're, if it's like you said, if it's the small little bit on, the processing side of it, okay, if I'm just trying to reduce, that's probably not a big deal.
Right.
But what are the bigger things that we need to look for? Is it just specifically looking for, is it labeled corn oil, or are there other things?
Yeah, if it's in a food in a meaningful large amount, I would say it's typically going to be labeled. There is one exception to that I'll get to in a minute, which
Mhm.
relates to kind of a type of fraud that happens with these premium oils and fats that we were talking about. Um, I want to highlight too that you said reduce versus eliminate. That's important.
Mhm.
We would expect that a lot of the benefits that people may be interested in don't require eating zero seed oils.
Right.
There are some reasons why it could make sense to consider trying zero seed oils, particularly if someone has a health problem
Mhm.
and they're looking to control all of those factors. But for a reasonably healthy person that just wants to stay healthy, you know, question number one is, are you getting 20 to 30% of your calories from seed oils? And if so, you could start by reducing.
Yeah.
Maybe you feel better, maybe you don't notice anything, but you're probably eating better just by substituting other oils and fats
Mhm.
in place of those seed oils. Maybe, like you said, cooking a little bit more at home. So I would start by looking at the pantry and just
Mhm.
looking to see, if you're eating snack foods, are they made with seed oils? Because they're probably a pretty significant source of exposure.
Right.
The snack foods that are made with premium oils and fats do cost more,
Mhm.
but because that's not really a staple, like, in other words, potato chips are not ideally our main source of calories during the
Right.
day. I would say, if it's a recreational snack and just something that you enjoy eating, definitely swap those out with, other foods that, premium kind of quality snacks that are
Mhm.
made with non-seed oils.
Yeah.
Um, like we said, looking at the dressings and sauces and condiments, looking at the actual cooking oil that you use at home. Anything labeled vegetable oil is mostly just going to be soybean oil, sometimes a mix of corn and soybean oil.
Mhm.
Um, Canola oil is not as high in omega-6 fats, but it's high in a low quality form of omega-3 fats called alpha linolenic acid.
Yep. Mhm.
So when you heat it up, that ALA actually breaks down into harmful byproducts. It's not a major source of, again, omega-6 fats, but one of the reasons that one of the reasons for health concerns around seed oils is that when you heat them up, they break down very rapidly into byproducts because they're high
Yeah.
in polyunsaturated fats.
Right.
Um, so, start by looking around the house. If you're noticing that they're in almost everything, then you kind of have some homework in terms of finding options that may not be laden with seed oils.
Mhm.
For people that eat out a lot at restaurants, almost every restaurant uses seed oils because of the cost reasons. I
Right.
have some sympathy there for restaurants. I don't think
Yeah.
that they're uh, you know doing the wrong thing intentionally. I think it just comes down to cost.
Mhm.
What I can say is that these days, if a restaurant doesn't use seed oils, they're going to tell you about it. They're really proud of it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so you can actually go to, you can just type in, if you live in a somewhat uh, populated area, you can probably just go to Google and type in seed oil free restaurants near me, or
Yeah.
your town plus seed oil free.
Yeah.
Um, So yeah, those would probably be the tips. I think reading labels is always good, like whether you have a sensitivity or an allergy or you just want to know what's in your food.
Mhm.
Looking for those ingredients that say, you know, oil and then appear to have been made from a seed. It's pretty easy, I think, grape seed,
Mhm.
sunflower seed, you know, it's
Yeah.
not made from the flower. If it says sunflower oil, it's not made from the flower.
Right. Right. Well, and I would assume that too, that with some of those in the way that they break down and like you were saying earlier, that things have to be added to them. A lot of times the stuff that's added to them is also not necessarily what we want to ingest if we're looking to be healthy on the other side of it, because it's going to be refined sugar, it's going to be other things that are going to be like from a taste standpoint helping the product get better, but not necessarily what we want to ingest.
Right, right. So when we're looking at, if you just imagine shopping at a grocery store and you kind of look at, okay, the price of a bag of chips may start at $2, it may go up
Mhm.
to $8 or $9.
Right.
At that lower price bracket, there are people at those corporations that are figuring out how can we make this as palatable as
Mhm.
possible, as cheaply as possible, and
Right.
the goal is not to make something wholesome or healthy. And this is interesting because it's actually one of the kind of maybe points of agreement between people who are concerned about seed oils and people who aren't, is it's probably a good idea not to get a ton of your calories from ultra processed foods.
Mhm.
And so if your personal exploration of avoiding seed oils kind of moves you away from ultra processed foods, that could be a good thing.
Right.
I would make the case though that enjoying life and
Mhm.
um, eating what you want to eat to some extent, you can still be healthy. And that's where it would be important to look at things like, what is the type and quality of oil that's used in those potato chips?
Right. And that's one of the things that like you could still find those out. Like you can still find chips out there that are going to be a higher quality. They're going to be cooked in the right type of oils. Um, and so, yeah, you're minimizing instead of 20 to 30% of your calories in that danger zone down to 2 to 5%, and you
Right.
can still enjoy life and still have that treat. Those things are still out there.
Yeah, exactly. And it again, it kind of comes down to the individual. Like if you're dealing with serious health problems, like if you've got
Mhm.
gut health issues and migraines and you're miserable and you just are like, I'm just going to go to zero and see if it
Yeah.
helps with this to some extent. That's one type of person. Another type of person is like, maybe they feel like they're pretty healthy overall, but they're thinking longer term and they want to avoid some of these, potentially harmful issues down the line
Yeah.
that are avoidable. I think in that case, it's sensible. I put myself in that category. I'd say if somebody invites me to eat at a nice restaurant, there's a little bit of a seed oil here and there. Like I'm not going to have a problem with it.
Right.
I know that I'm not eating there every day.
Mhm.
When we shop for our family here at home, we're minimizing, pretty much avoiding seed oils, partly just because we think that voting with your dollar is a good way to get companies to pay attention to this issue.
Right. Right.
Um, but if, say, my wife accidentally buys something that's got a little bit of, maybe the fifth ingredient is canola oil or something like that,
Mhm.
we'll probably eat it that one time and not buy it again.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think there are a lot of different ways to approach this issue that are all reasonable. I think it all starts with awareness. Why
Mhm.
are you doing it? What are you looking to solve here? Another thing that I don't think is discussed enough is that non-seed oils just taste better, and they're you know
Yeah.
they're suggestive of a higher quality product because the amount of, like we were saying, having to add these other ingredients like
Mhm.
MSG and maltodextrin, and hey, regardless of whether those are directly harmful, they're really not necessary
Yeah.
unless you're looking to bolster the flavor profile. Why not
Right.
go with the most wholesome, delicious, high quality recipe possible. And I think this is an area right now where companies are feeling a lot of pressure. If you're charging $7 for a bag of chips and you're using sunflower oil, there's kind of a squeeze right now because
Yeah.
all of your competitors are using things like avocado oil and olive oil.
Mhm. Well, and so from that standpoint, like what you're looking at, because obviously you're seeing a lot of companies and they're talking to you about like, okay, how do we get the certification? Um, and so I'm sure you're aware of some of those price point pinches that that companies are going through and manufacturers are going through. But you mentioned voting with your dollar, and like so when we do vote with our dollar and say, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and buy the more expensive one because it's what is going to be healthier for me and my decision point at this juncture of my life. Is that something like these other, the oils that are healthier for us? Is it something that supply and demand could change that, or is it just a matter of like the processing's too expensive and these types of things are just still burdensome for those manufacturers?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say, there is like an upper limit. Like this is, before we recorded, we were talking about, is it possible for RFK to ban seed oils, like all,
Right.
all seed oils
Yeah.
overnight?
Yeah.
That's not possible because, if everybody switched tomorrow, voluntarily or otherwise, there's really not enough supply immediately of any
Right.
other oil or fat, even animal fats,
Yeah.
which can be produced in a decentralized way. You
Yeah.
can have a cow that you share with another family and get milk and butter and
Hmm.
beef and tallow if you want. You know,
Yeah.
I don't know about you. I don't have a cow in my yard right now.
Right.
So these are all kind of theoretical.
Yeah.
Um, the the way that shifting tends to work is, companies identify an opportunity like, hey, this will differentiate me from competitors, and
Hmm.
my customers have been emailing me asking about this or kind of criticizing on social media my products for having seed oils.
Yeah.
They get interested to switch. Um, yeah, avocado oil and olive oil are not necessarily going to, ever substitute one for one for the amount of seed oils that we're consuming.
Yeah.
I think, we've certified a few companies like Algae Cooking Club
Hmm.
and Spotlight Foods. These companies make a high oleic uh, oil through a fermentation process using algae. So
Hmm.
the idea is, and it uses sugarcane waste, not non-GMO
Ah.
sugarcane waste.
Yeah.
So the idea is, this kind of supply and demand factor does bring in other actors that are looking to solve these issues through
Hmm.
unconventional means.
Yeah.
I would say, some consumers are like, that's great, it's sustainable, it's kind of similar to olive oil in the fatty acid profile, it's not a
Hmm.
seed oil, I'm in. Other people are like, I don't know, like that's pretty new, it's not for me. So there are some adoption issues. I think, you know, we've we've encouraged a restaurant to start using this for frying. They like
Hmm.
it. Their customers like it. Um, a lot of people like using oils like Algae Cooking Club at home
Hmm.
for, for their cooking. I
Yeah.
think, for most people it's not an issue, but however, it's not as cheap right now as seed oils.
Right.
Maybe if they 10x or 100x, then they're going to be able to compete on cost with seed oils. On
Right.
on the other hand, seed oils, one of the reasons that they're so cheap is because soy and corn are some of the most subsidized crops. So,
Right.
you know, if RFK wants to subsidize tallow
Yeah.
and algae oil and all, like say American grown olive oil,
Right.
that could level the playing field too.
Right.
I will say too, we start looking at some ingredients that people are less familiar with, like for example, palm oil is not a
Hmm.
seed oil. A lot of people
Right.
think it is. It's actually not. And you know, palm oil is about 10 times more efficient in terms of land use compared
Yeah.
to seed oil crops because it's a perennial. It
Hmm.
doesn't have to be harvested completely and replanted.
Right.
And it's a tropical fruit that just yields a ton per acre.
Yeah.
It's had kind of a bad image because of environmental impact, but there are now companies out there that are doing sustainable palm oil. So
Hmm.
they're not deforesting, they're not draining swamps and tearing down rainforests.
Yeah.
That's pretty promising. Kind of gets into some issues around saturated fat. That would be the other objection that people have to palm oil. But I think if this movement continues growing and or there is some legislative push to get rid of seed oils, I don't think there's going to be any one ingredient that substitutes. I think it's going to
Right.
be several.
Right.
And I get a little worried. I get a little worried in terms of government interventions because I think that markets probably handle this better than somebody
Hmm.
saying like you have to get rid of this right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think I agree with that. And I think that that's the biggest piece of educating the public because, the government can say, okay, we're going to do this, that, or the other thing. Companies are going to fight back because it's their tradition and it's what they've done and it's their processes. And, they don't want to have to come up with a whole new thing. But it's different if the people stop buying that and start buying something else because then they'll go, oh, wait, now I have to do that. Right?
Right.
I'm not being forced to do it from somebody else telling me this. I got to do it to stay alive, um, in change. And so I think that's where the education piece of understanding that this is where, and then it goes to, okay, well, the seed oil thing is sort of like, okay, well, you've got to dig down into what is a seed oil? Like we talked about, like it's the omega-6 fat and like, what are you looking at? What are you getting? How are you combating how this acts in your body? Um, And that's where everybody's a little bit different because everybody's going to react to it differently, right? Like you said, some people are going to have gut issues and some people aren't. And some people are going to have gut issues with just a little amount. And some people are going to wait until they have that, 30 to 40% of their calories coming from it before they realize anything's wrong. And that's where we have to be conscious of, okay, wait a minute, but this is actually setting us up for a trend that's really bad for our health in the future.
Right. Yeah, and I think I have a couple thoughts on, one is if you'd like to hear my sort of 3 or 4 point checklist for RFK,
Hmm.
um, and how effective I think effective intervention could work as opposed to just saying they're banned, because I just don't
Right.
think that's going to happen.
Right.
And then the other one too, I did want to explore a little bit more, just for people who are interested in this but haven't really looked into it yet. I do want to talk a little bit more about the health side.
Yeah.
So,
Sure.
one thing that, actually, by the way, people can do this at the local and state level too. You don't even have to have RFK do it. There is a very, very good body of evidence that when seed oils are heated, like frying at a restaurant, that they produce compounds that are harmful to health.
Hmm.
Primarily we would be talking about aldehydes,
Right.
which are also produced when we drink too much alcohol or smoke cigarettes. Polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which end up in food, trans fats.
Hmm.
Those are pretty uncontroversially harmful. They're
Yep.
actually produced when you heat seed oils for a long period of time. And then polymer-like compounds. So
Hmm.
seed oils will actually interact with food and cooking surfaces and form these plastic,
Yeah.
similar to plastic type compounds. So what I would love to see is I would love to see a grassroots push for warning labels on
Hmm.
restaurant foods that
Yeah.
are cooked in reheated seed oils.
Right.
So people should kind of separate this out in their mind. It's not strictly an omega-6 issue, it's a polyunsaturated fat issue.
Yeah.
And hey, we have tobacco warning labels, we have alcohol warning labels, probably, vape warning labels.
Right.
Um, you know, Probably there may be a warning label on glyphosate. I haven't bought it in a while, so
Hmm. Yeah.
I'm not a
Yeah.
not a big glyphosate user, but
Yeah.
so I think warning labels are pretty reasonable to kind of
Hmm.
start getting people aware of like, hey, like this carton of fries contains harmful byproducts as a result of heated
Right.
polyunsaturated fats.
Right.
That's something that I think would be very effective and reasonable. It's not too burdensome. It's
Hmm.
probably, a lot of people that eat fast food every day probably would just ignore it. But,
Sure.
for people that are totally unaware of these issues, it gives them kind of an insight into what's happening when they're eating these
Right.
heated seed oils.
Yeah.
The other one that I don't think is going to happen right now is I'd like to see incentives and subsidies shifted
Hmm.
with the Farm Bill and
Right.
USDA.
Yeah.
Because like we were talking about, soy and corn are two of the top most subsidized crops.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at, why are seed oils so common, there's a relationship or a correlation there. Unfortunately, the USDA appointee that was confirmed was formerly like a seed oil lobbyist.
Hmm.
I think her name is Brooke Rollins. So I don't, even though RFK has been confirmed as health secretary, I don't know
Yeah.
that he can have that impact at the USDA. Then the
Right.
Farm Bill is congressionally approved, so potentially they could kind of build something like that. But
Right.
I still think that would be a great way to do it because you could just shift subsidies away from these empty calorie, high
Yeah.
omega-6 seed oils, into other foods. Like why don't we subsidize apples and
Right.
and fruits
Yeah.
and nutritious vegetables,
Right.
uh, and other, alternatives to seed oils.
Yeah.
And then the third thing that's super important, and that I'm really hopeful, is actually funding better research. So,
Hmm.
right now the state of the research is that there is a ton of peer-reviewed evidence that suggests reason for health concern around seed oils.
Yeah.
However, there's also a lot of observational evidence that is
Hmm.
used to support potential health benefits of seed oils.
Right.
Funding, they're really expensive, but funding good quality randomized controlled trials that can answer a bunch of unanswered questions,
Yeah.
you know, I'm betting that it would actually push us in the direction of banning
Yeah.
the most common seed oils.
Hmm.
But it's a fair compromise because I'm also saying that we don't really have enough evidence right now to say, hey, they're responsible for like every health problem under the sun.
Right.
My position is we don't really know. The evidence suggests that they could be correlated with a lot of health issues.
Hmm.
You don't have to eat them.
Yeah.
I'm not eating them.
Right.
But with like replications of older studies that showed harm from seed oils and a lot of the newer insights that we have about how these pathways work and how these mechanisms work, it would be incredibly helpful. But it's like hundreds of millions of dollars to do
Right.
it.
Right.
So pharma companies aren't interested in funding studies on seed oils.
No, not at all.
So uh,
Well, and and I've said this before on here is talking about research and when you're looking at, so many people just take a headline. Hey, this study came out and said blah blah blah. Oh, okay, I can, whatever that is. And like you have to not just dig down into, you know, how detailed was the research? Was it peer reviewed? Was it, all this, but also where's the funding coming from? Right. And it's like, okay, we have to pay attention to that. Because, and I use this example because it's one that I got as an exercise guy. So many people years ago kept asking me like, what's the deal with chocolate milk all of a sudden becoming so, you know, after you work out, you're supposed to, and I'm like, I have never done that. It would not be like the thing I would want at that moment. Like, but everybody's like, oh, but it's got more protein. Like this survey or this study says that it's got more protein than, sports drinks, and that's what you need right after you work out. And then I went down and I looked, and I'm like, well, of course, it provides more protein than a sports drink because a sports drink has zero protein, right?
right.
So okay, check back there. But the dairy industry paid for the study
Yeah.
to promote their,
100%.
and so I'm like, what? What's the point? Like you're fighting a battle that got all this, and I've seen billboards still that promote it as a after workout drink, like that are still on the road. And I'm just like, okay, but that's not the point of what we're trying to get to after a workout. We're trying to replenish fluids and electrolytes and move on with life.
Yeah,
And,
no,
and
that's a
so,
great example. Great example of marketing through studies for sure.
yep.
I think they were saying it has a 2-to-1 ratio of carbs to protein, and that's
Hmm.
optimal.
Hmm.
Of course, you could get it through any number of things, but
Yeah.
um, they're selling the chocolate milk, so
Right. So it's like they
uh,
got to be able to do that.
yeah.
But
So yeah, if you'd like to kind of dive in a little bit more, and by the way, the seed oil that I forgot earlier, it's kind of hard to remember. It's rice bran oil.
oh
Um,
yeah.
yeah, the one that is it's actually just made from the outer,
Hmm.
um, the outer husk of the rice, but it's
Yeah.
still a seed oil.
Yeah.
Because I was going through a list of 8 or 9, and I
Yeah.
left that one off. Um, so I would say, high level kind of bullet points that we could dive into, but I think that people should be aware of is, you know, um, regardless of the specific effects of omega-6 on an individual or like a type of person or a health condition, people are consuming more omega-6 fats than ever before.
Hmm.
And that's a direct result. We went from eating um, almost no seed oils,
Right.
like we talked about, a little bit of sesame oil in certain countries traditionally and things like that, but nothing like we have today with
Yeah.
soybean, corn, and canola.
Yeah.
Um, we went from that to like a decade over decade increase in seed oil consumption in the 20th century, and omega-6 fats are essential. So we have to get a small amount of them from
Yep.
somewhere in the diet. It can be whole nuts,
Right.
seeds, animal foods. There are many different ways to get them. It's almost unheard of for someone who is not starving to have an omega-6 deficiency. So
Right.
just to actually meet your needs, you only need about 1 or 2% of your calories from omega-6 fats.
Yeah.
Could there be some benefit to going above that in some cases? That's not impossible, but just to prevent deficiency, you only need 1 to 2% of your calories.
Hmm.
We talked about how today the average American gets 20 or 30% of their calories from seed oils. Now, seed oils typically contain about 40 to 60% omega-6 fats.
Hmm.
So that means that actually, say 10 to 15 to 18%, somewhere in there,
Yeah.
of actual calories are coming from actual omega-6 fatty acids.
Right.
So as a result of that, um, one of the biggest reasons for concern is the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio.
Yep.
Now, there are two different ways to think about this ratio. There's the dietary ratio. In other words, you know, if you did a food log, you could do the math and say, I'm getting 40 grams of omega-6 fats and 4 grams of omega-3 fats. So
Right.
that's a 10 to 1 ratio.
Right.
The dietary ratio is easy to calculate, and I think that, the estimates vary, but historically, like throughout human history, the estimated balance was typically somewhere between 1 to 1 and 4 to 1.
Yeah.
So that's when we look at the dietary ratio. A better way to calculate it is called the biomarker
Hmm.
omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. So you can actually get a blood test and you can measure the amount of omega-6 linoleic acid to the ratio of DHA.
Right.
DHA is a very important, I know you know this, but for any listeners that may not be as familiar with omega-3s, DHA is a long form active omega-3, and we can really only get it from marine seafood, including fish oil, wild caught fish, krill. There are algae oil supplements that have it.
Hmm.
That's really the only place that you can get significant amounts of like the active form of
Right.
DHA. The other way that our body can produce DHA is if we eat alpha linolenic acid, ALA, plant-based omega-3, like from flaxseed oil
Right.
or soybean oil. There's a very inefficient conversion process where about less than 5% of the ALA is converted to EPA,
Hmm.
and typically less than 1% is converted to DHA.
Oh,
So
wow.
that's actually one reason. And by the way, too, the more omega-6 fats that you're eating, the less efficient that conversion process in the
Right.
liver is
Right.
because they compete for that pathway.
Yeah.
Um, so that's one reason that just looking at people will look at, hey, like, soybean oil, okay, it's 50% omega-6 fats, but it's also, 8 to 10% omega-3 fats. That
Hmm.
soybean oil has a 4 to 1 ratio. That's not bad.
Yeah.
The problem is that's the dietary ratio. When you actually look at how much of the ALA your body can convert into the useful active EPA and DHA,
Hmm.
that dietary ratio goes out the window.
Yeah.
Some of the strongest evidence that we have right now on omega-6 to omega-3 biomarker ratios does suggest that people with the highest ratios of omega-6 to omega-3, which is like omega-6 linoleic acid to DHA
Hmm.
in plasma,
Hmm.
have a higher risk of death from all causes as well as death from cancer or heart
Right.
disease. So that's probably the cleanest, simplest way to understand,
Yeah.
you know, hey, we're eating more omega-6 fats than ever before. People have these higher ratios than ever before. And in the current population, people are more likely to die from, cancer, heart disease, or all causes.
Right.
So, um, one solution that people get out of this is, well, I'll just eat more omega-3 fats. Well, that's also kind of an experiment because we've never,
Yeah.
we're taking this unprecedented situation of you're eating more omega-6 fats than ever before, and you say, oh, well, I'll achieve balance by eating more omega-3 fats than ever before.
Right.
The simpler way to handle that is just to reduce your omega-6 intake.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the other, the other one that I alluded to when I was talking about warning labels is that any time that seed oils are heated or when they're
Hmm.
stored for long periods of time or with an open bottle or in direct sunlight,
Yeah.
the polyunsaturated fats are much less stable
Hmm.
compared to monounsaturated fats like we get from olive oil or saturated fats like we get from tropical fruit oils or animal fats.
Hmm.
The polyunsaturated fats are so unstable that they form byproducts at a much higher rate, and that's cumulative. So when we're talking about eating, aldehydes, uh, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, trans fats, polymers, um, those things are just uncontroversially bad for your health,
Yeah.
which is why even a lot of people that defend seed oils, they'll still say, well, don't eat fried foods. It's like, hey, you know what? If I want to eat fried foods once in a while and they're
Yeah.
not fried in seed oils and they're giving me 100 times less of these harmful byproducts, like that's my
Right.
business. Like, you
Right.
know, so that's one of the arguments that you'll see in favor of seed oils is like, hey, it's not the seed oils, it's the fried foods. It's not the seed
Right.
oils, it's the ultra processed foods. Like it's anything but the seed oils. But
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, there is great experimental evidence showing that you can measure these levels of harmful byproducts, and then
Hmm.
there's they're just uncontroversially bad for your health.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
you want to live a little bit and eat some fried foods, just try to get them not fried in seed oils.
Right. Well, and that's a huge piece of the fast food industry when you think about um, is how much of the oil that they're cooking it in is heated too high, or you know it's been heated and reheated. And I mean, I know there's standards that are supposed to prevent that stuff from happening, but most of the time those are pushed to the limits, because of a cost standpoint.
Sure.
And so it's like, okay, well, you know, um, you're running into that, which again goes back to, okay, well, if I cook at home, I've got a lot more control over that. Having fried food at home is completely, well, not completely different, but a big difference from getting it at a restaurant.
No,
Um,
you're totally right. I
you know,
agree with that.
and it's, I've got two teenagers and we're teaching our kids how to cook, and so it's, they put olive oil in and they turn it all the way up to get it hot. And I'm like, whoa, turn it down. We don't want to burn it. We don't want to cook it too high.
Yeah.
Like, oh, but it gets there faster. I'm like, it doesn't matter if it gets there faster. I don't want it to get there faster. You've got to keep it at these limits. Otherwise, you do get those byproducts, and that's, and that happens with any oil, really, because you can overheat anything to a
Yeah,
point where it's going to be
absolutely.
bad.
Yeah, and actually some nuance too on assuming that we're talking about cooking at home and we're talking about using non-seed oils and so we're looking at olive oil, avocado oil, uh, coconut oil, ghee, butter, we could add algae oil and similar kind of novel fermented oils to that list like Zero Acre, um, and tallow.
Mhm.
A lot of people don't like to cook that are kind of concerned about seed oils don't like to cook with lard just because it
Yeah,
is higher in polyunsaturated fats. You
right.
could probably get pastured lard that's lower,
Mhm.
but we'll kind of set lard off to the side. So I think, something important that people should know is, like you said, you don't want to see the oil smoking,
Right.
but as a consumer cooking at home, smoke point can also be somewhat misleading. So soybean oil typically is advertised as having a smoke point of 450 degrees Fahrenheit.
Mhm.
Two things about that. One is um, that's when it starts visibly smoking, but because it's high in polyunsaturated fats, it's actually creating these harmful byproducts even at lower temperatures. Like even if you're
Right.
sautéing at 350, it's still creating 10 to 100 times more of those harmful byproducts.
Yeah.
Not as bad compared to the 3-day-old fryer oil at the restaurant, but
Yeah.
still not a good thing.
Yeah.
Um, and the other interesting thing too is that you can actually modify your cooking technique a little bit. Sounds like you were working on this with your kids, but
Mhm.
um, most of the time when you would use oil, you can keep the temperature below 400 degrees Fahrenheit, and
Mhm.
almost no oils will smoke. Like even olive oil kind of gets written off as like, don't heat it at all. The only reason that people the only good reason that people recommend against heating olive oil is if you have an expensive extra virgin olive oil,
Mhm.
it will degrade the polyphenols. It's not
Right.
bad for you. It's just like
Right.
reducing the benefits a little bit.
Yeah.
It's actually great for cooking, depending on what you're looking to
Hmm.
get out of it. But I would say people can mostly cook in a heat range around 350 to 375 Fahrenheit, where
Hmm.
almost no oils will smoke. You might not want to
Right.
use regular butter, but you could use ghee.
Mhm.
Um, and if you just manage the heat in that way, you really never have to worry about smoke point.
Right.
Um, Now, if you're thinking about like searing a steak or something like that, I would probably just use cast iron without any oil in
Right.
it.
Yep.
That beef is gonna produce some fat as it heats up.
Hmm.
There are a
Hmm.
lot of things that you can do. Broiling in the oven. If you don't have a lot of oil, even a little bit of olive oil, if you're like broiling to finish off a lasagna or something like
Right.
that for 3 or 4 minutes, it's not
Yeah.
gonna make your olive oil smoke. So
Right. Right.
uh, yeah, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about smoke point, and I think it's even professional chefs will say, well, we have to we're cooking with high heat here in the kitchen, like we have to use soybean oil, we can't use olive oil.
Right.
If they really look at their method, that little bit of oil that they're adding to prevent from sticking or something like that, it's not consequential compared to changing your technique a little bit
Hmm.
and using the right oil that's better for you at lower
Right.
temperatures and just figuring out how to get a sear
Yeah.
or finish it off in the oven or whatever. Like it's not, you should really never see any oil smoke. Like
Right.
that's
Yeah.
more of a cooking technique issue than
Yeah.
an oil choice issue.
Right. Yep. Very true. Well, Corey, I want to give you an opportunity to let people know how to get involved with the Seed Oil Free Alliance, how to follow y'all, and how, like, if somebody's listening who is a restaurant and it's like, okay, maybe I want to get involved in this and like change my practices. Um, like how would they follow along?
Sure. Well, we love to speak to people at companies, like regardless of whether they're immediately ready to switch. It's a great conversation to have. The easiest way to book a meeting is that, someone that owns a restaurant or a packaged food company or is thinking about starting one, there are a lot of great opportunities.
Mhm.
People need to make companies that have high quality like condiments and sauces. There are just
Right.
hardly any seed oil free condiments and sauces out there. There's a huge
Yeah.
opportunity. So anyone that's at any stage of thinking about that can go to our site, seedoilfreecertified.com, and book a meeting there or check their product eligibility. For consumers, we do have some consumer education on that site right now. We'll be building more. You
Hmm.
can go to seedoilfreecertified.com and sign up for our updates on email and text.
Yeah.
We do have an Instagram where we put out some educational content and announce our brand partners, which is at Seed Oil Free Certified on Instagram.
Cool.
And yeah, love to hear from people. Love to get questions. We can turn it into a social post if you have a
Hmm.
question um, that you need answered, or again, just kind of talk to people that are passionate about this. I would say as well, Jerry, I don't know if I can send you a file of the seal to maybe include in the
Sure.
thumbnail or something like that. But
Yeah.
yeah, look for the green droplet that says seed oil free certified.
Yeah.
When you see that on a product package, it means that we have audited the ingredient list. We actually do lab testing, which is something that we didn't get to today.
Nice.
But we actually do lab testing on their oils and fats to make sure that they're pure.
Hmm.
Frequently, when we're working with companies, we actually find that they're not using a pure, say, avocado oil. We help
Right.
them switch. So if you see that seal on a company's product, they have just been through a really intensive process to make sure that their products are seed oil free because they really care about it.
Yeah.
And that is, head and shoulders above just saying no seed oils, because
Right.
when they're accountable to us and they're playing by our rules, you know that that product is actually seed oil free. So consumers that are interested in helping us out can also kind of email their favorite companies and say, hey, like this would mean a lot to me if you got this
Right.
certification, if you feel
Right.
that way as a consumer.
Yeah. Awesome. And something else we didn't get to, but I wanted to point out for anybody listening is that if they go to the website and look, like the people that you have involved are like top level, like people involved in nutrition and in like in this world. And so that was another thing that I saw as just doing research, and I was like, okay, wait, these are big players that are really important and really understanding what's going on. So it's not just It's not just this small little group of people that are like, oh, hey, wait, we want to fight this fight. Like y'all are the top movers and shakers in the industry. And I think that's important, both from understanding, as much as you've shared as far as the research and the studies and the knowledge behind what's going on, but also having the connections to be able to actually make stuff happen.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Yeah, we our team of advisors and people that work with us, we definitely want to work with the best. And so like you said, we've got doctors. We actually got a couple people that aren't on the site yet, but really really cool people on our advisory team that are doctors, dietitians,
Mhm.
different types of experts that can kind of make sure that we're on the right track with all this.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. So Corey, I want to thank you so much for being a guest. It's been tremendously educational.
Thank you, Jerry. It was great to talk to you.
Thanks for checking out the Confidence Through Health podcast. Please subscribe, post a review, share this episode with those you love who need a little extra help with their health journey. Visit allinhealthandwellness.com to learn more about the coaching programs that I provide. All episodes are produced by the Social Media Cowboys, your source for all online marketing needs. Go to socialmediacowboys.com for more information.